later on down the road when we picked up Co's, we were recording through a family friend, and his setup was great. It really brought out like the dynamic of all the instruments as far as guitars are concerned.
Standing alone, fresh blood on my hands, replaying my memories since past. My face to the ground, my voice near gone, screaming at nothing for so long. Moments that pass, my soul.
But the problem we ran into with that is we were recording out of his room, no real space for drums, you know, so we kind of had to just stick with like a drum track, you know, and that also became another issue because, you know, we felt that some of the tracks that we laid on there were too generic, or we couldn't find one that fit the song well. So eventually we kind of dropped it, you know, and had to come back and rethink our game.
I really see that like the drums really add kind of a life to the songs, kind of a bounce. I always view drums as being all about power, and it's been all about the passion. Like you can't just have a drummer who just keeps a beat. If your drumming is just plain and basic, then your music is puppeteered as opposed to just straight up being alive.
Hello world, this is MetalBrook, and it is recording day, the first day. I am here with my main man, Guitar Master X, the Lord of Spiky Guitars, and we're about to get things started.
Damn right.
I hit my pinky with my drumstick. Whoops. Alright, I'm ready to go again.
Alright, here we go.
I definitely like thinking about my parts, listening to songs, really taking care of what I feel really should go into these songs. That's a thing that I've done as a musician for a long time. I've always been someone who listens to everyone else and tries to make my parts off of what everyone else is doing. Yeah, drumming for this band is really it's just all about listening to everyone else and listening to what everyone else is playing and just doing something based on what I hear. That was shit. It's just because I play a kick note on top of that snare. That's why it feels really weird. We don't have enough cowbell. So that's my percussion rig. It has 3 agogo bells, 6 cowbells, 2 LP blocks. I don't take it to live shows because it's for auxiliary purposes, it's for textures in recording. You want to know what the worst part about recording is? Taking an hour to set up a microphone just to record 7 notes. So this is the drum kit tour. I used Tama drums as well as Zildjian cymbals. On Darknesses, I used Vic Firth 7A sticks, but I switched to a ProMark over the course of time. I actually switched to an oval tip instead of a bead tip too to really give me lightweight sticks. 7A is already a lightweight stick, but I really needed Pro Marks to really show off my passion, just the motion of how I play. I actually used to use nylon tip sticks too, but I decided against them because wooden tips actually are much better for the sound. Nylon tips really compromise the sound. Now you're probably thinking, well, why don't you just use nylon tips for practice and then save the wooden tips for recording and for show? Well, it's because there's such a big difference in the sound using nylon tips and wooden tips that it's really not worth it. I'd rather use a sound that I'm comfortable with than a sound that I want, rather than a sound that I don't want and trying to work with it. And then all of a sudden we go to a live show and my drums sound different, and it's just completely disorienting. It's just not worth it. So for toms, I have 4 toms, 3 rack, 1 floor, so an 8, 10, 12, 14. 14 is actually kind of small, so I tune it really low to kind of give it that depth that 16 or an 18 inch can provide. I kind of do the same thing for the 12 inch. The 12 inch is actually kind of in between, so it's like I can play it in between fills and make it sound like a medium sounding tom, or I can play it with the floor tom to make it sound like a second floor tom. The toms are Tama Superstar, so they're made of maple, so I have them tuned to make them sound pretty aggressive, and I use Remo clear pinstripe heads to make them sound that aggressive, but then I have these dampener rings on them to kind of cut the sound back a little bit. Like it still gets the aggressive sound that I want, but it cuts back a little bit to make it sound a lot crisper. And then for resonant heads on the toms, I use Remo ambassadors because they're really thin and they don't interfere with that aggressive sound that I kind of want to achieve. The bass drum is a 22 inch. The head I use is actually an Aquarian Super Kick 2. That is actually the only exception to my Remo head rule. I use this head because it has a dampener ring inside the drum head, so it's basically for the same reason why I use the dampening rings on the toms. For the resonant head, I use a Remo that has that MetalBrook logo on it. I have it custom ordered with a 7-inch hole. The thing about bass drums is that they have actually really low frequency sounds, so they don't come out as loud when we practice, so I really needed a hole really big so that it came out for practice. The way I view the hole in the kick drum is smaller than 4 inches makes the hole completely pointless, and bigger than 7 inches makes the entire drum head completely pointless. The snare drum is a little bit different. Instead of a Superstar, this is actually a Tama Star Classic Birch Babinga snare. It's 14 inches in diameter and it's 5.5 inches in depth, which is bigger than most snare drums. The extra depth really gives it that really deep sound that heavy metal really needs. It's also made of 2 different kinds of woods, birch and babinga. So birch kind of gives it a really loud crack. It makes the loud crack in the snare really cut through the mix, and then the babinga wood gives it kind of a warm body. For the top head, I use Remo controlled sound. So kind of like what I do with the toms, I give the snare a very aggressive, very loud cracking sound, but then I use the head to kind of scale it back. The reason I don't use a dampener ring or a moon gel or anything is just because it just takes away too much. And for the bottom head, I have a Remo Diplomat, which it's about like the thinnest resonant head you can get for a snare. The snare wire really reacts to it very well. It's tuned nice and tight in order to give the snare a really crisp sound. Now for the octobans, I also use clear pinstripes on them. They're all 6 inches in diameter, and by depth are 9, 11, 13, 15. For darkness I had less cymbals when I was writing the parts. So before, I only had the 1 ride, 1 china, 2 crashes, and 2 splashes. And these were all picked out specifically with the darkness's theme in mind. So I guess the first thing to talk about is the ride, because I use this ride mostly for Darkness This is a 20-inch K custom dark ride. It just has a really dark sound to it as advertised. I used it for most of the songs, save for We Are Immortal and Live My Darker Self. The one I used for those songs is actually this one over here, the 21-inch A Sweet Ride. It has kind of brighter sound. There's a brilliant finished version of it that I kind of wanted, but I felt like it was a little bit bright for the kind of music that we did, so I settled for the regular. Ooh yeah, that sexy sweet ride. So I would switch between them for recordings. The crashes I use are these this pair of dark thin crashes, 16-inch and 18-inch. I went with the thins because they cut through a lot nicer than the regulars. I use a 17-inch K custom China. My original first choice was a Wuhan, but I needed China that actually matched the sound of the rest of the cymbals. And then I have these two splashes. This one was just recently replaced, which is why it's a lot shinier. But it still has a darker sound than this really old 8-inch K custom cymbal. So like this is an 8, this is a 10. That's all I really had for darkness is. The one cymbal that contrasts with this dark scheme is this pair of 14-inch A Master Sound hi-hats. It's a bright sounding pair of hi-hats to really contrast with all the dark sounding cymbals. And then on the hi-hats I also have this Gibraltar SG-DC drop clutch. So I can do double bass with the hi-hats closed. Just a stick, hit it, double bass, hit the hi-hat pedal again, if you need it, open again. So the new cymbals that I added for this EP is this pair of Zildjian A splashes, a 6 and an 8-inch. Much brighter sounding splashes for, honestly, brighter sounding songs. They actually really fit for changes in key signature, where it's like I'm playing one pair of splashes, I'm playing the dark pair of splashes in a certain chord progression, and then the bright pair in another. The rides are actually set up the same way. I have both the rides set up now so that I can use them interchangeably in between the songs. And then to top it all off, I have this 13-inch Zildjian Oriental China. So the pedals I use are Speed Cobras, suited for fast-paced death metal playing, which is why they have that really long footboard. They're more suited for people with kick triggers, but I really like the way they feel, and I use them anyway. The beaters I use are actually these pretty typical normal felt beaters. I have my kick drum tuned in a certain way to get a really sharp cutting attack out of them with the felt beaters, kind of like if I were using wooden beaters, but I held off on using wooden beaters because then I would have had to adjust the spring tension to something that I wasn't exactly familiar with. And that's it for the drums, ladies and gentlemen. Bass really kind of just sits in the middle, and it really gives that aggression. Guitar serves as a driving force as to what a band is really supposed to sound like. The vocals serve as a primary focal point.
We not only learned more about the mixing board itself, we also learned more about the dynamics of our own individual instruments. Coz, I think, out of all of us, he's been the one to really, draw out the best of these songs that that can be, because he's always working. He's always working, and he's always learning new things and studying. And
Mickey, what do you cats have to say for yourselves?
Let's get a formality pose.